Step into the opulent, terrifying world of Chicago's most ruthless crime syndicate, where weakness is a death sentence. Vincent Moretti ruled with an iron fist until a catastrophic ambush left him paralyzed from the waist down, driving away every caretaker in terror. Enter Pamela Russell, a desperate, plus-sized single mother facing eviction. She isn't intimidated by his billions, his wheelchair, or his loaded gun. She just needs a paycheck. What happens next defies every rule of the underworld. Gunfire had taken Vincent Moretti's legs, but it was the pity that was slowly killing his mind. Inside the sprawling, high-security fortress known as the Moretti Estate, the air was perpetually thick with tension. It was a Tuesday morning, raining heavily against the bulletproof glass of the master suite, when the loud crash of a shattered porcelain vase echoed down the marble hallways. Lachlan Bianchi, Vincent's underboss and oldest friend, pinched the bridge of his nose as a young woman in a crisp white nurse's uniform came sprinting out of the double oak doors. She was sobbing hysterically, a medical chart clutched to her chest, her face pale with absolute terror. He pulled a gun on me," the nurse shrieked, backing away from the doors as if a monster were about to burst through them. "I was just trying to adjust his leg rests. I can't do this. Keep the money. I'm leaving." Lachlan didn't bother stopping her. He simply pulled a thick envelope of hush money from his tailored suit jacket, pressed it into her trembling hands, and gestured toward the front door. She was the 14th private nurse to quit in a single month. No one lasted a day. Some barely lasted an hour. Vincent Moretti, the 34-year-old don of the Chicago syndicate, had been a towering, fearsome figure before a rival family's ambush sent a bullet shattering his lower spine. Now, confined to a customized titanium wheelchair, he had morphed into a cruel, bitter phantom. He refused physical therapy. He refused sympathy. Most of all, he refused to let anyone see him as an invalid, responding to any perceived slight with explosive, terrifying rage. Miles away from the suffocating wealth of the Moretti estate, Pamela Russell was fighting a very different kind of war. Pamela sat at the edge of a lumpy mattress in her cramped, unheated studio apartment, staring at a bright pink eviction notice taped to her front door. She was 28 years old, exhausted, and carrying 80 extra pounds that society never let her forget about. She had broad, soft shoulders, thick thighs, and a generous stomach that strained against the cheap fabric of her threadbare pencil skirt. For years, she had endured the cruel whispers and the side eyes at job interviews. Employers saw her size and assumed laziness. They saw her single mother status and assumed unreliability. They didn't know that she had the endurance of a freight train. "Mummy, are we moving again?" Pamela snapped out of her dark reverie and looked down at Oliver, her 6-year-old son, who was clutching a worn-out stuffed bear. His big brown eyes were filled with an anxious understanding no child should possess. Pamela forced a bright, reassuring smile, her plump cheeks dimpling. She reached out with soft, dimpled arms and pulled him into a tight hug. "No, Ollie Bear. Mummy is going to get a very special job today. We're going to be just fine." She had seen the advertisement on an obscure, high-end employment board late last night. Private executive assistant / caretaker. Immediate hire. $15,000 per month. Discretion mandatory. There was no company name, just an address in the hyper-exclusive northern suburbs and a contact name. Mr. L. Bianchi. $15,000 a month was life-changing. It was food, rent, and a safe neighborhood for Oliver. Pamela didn't care if she had to scrub toilets with a toothbrush. She was going to get this job. An hour later, after dropping Oliver off at an overcrowded public school, Pamela arrived at the gates of the massive estate. The sheer scale of the property was intimidating. Wrought iron gates, stone gargoyles, and armed security guards wearing earpieces. When she stated her name, the guards looked at her with blatant skepticism. They took in her frayed black blazer, her worn-out flats, and her heavy, curvy frame. One of them smirked, but buzzed her through anyway. Inside the grand foyer, Lachlan Bianchi was waiting. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his dark eyes speaking volumes. When he saw Pamela, his face fell slightly. "You're the 10 a.m.?" Lachlan asked, trying to keep the disappointment out of his voice. He had been expecting another seasoned, hardened trauma nurse, not this soft, heavy-set woman who looked like a neighborhood baker down on her luck. "Pamela Russell," she said, extending a steady, confident hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "I'm here for the caretaker position." Lachlan hesitated. "Miss Russell, I'll be completely honest with you. The man you would be caring for is difficult. He is recovering from a severe spinal cord injury. He is angry. He is aggressive. And he has a tendency to verbally destroy people. You don't strike me as someone who can handle a hostile environment." Pamela looked around the cavernous, eerily quiet mansion, then back at Lachlan. Her expression was entirely unbothered. "Mr. Bianchi, I survived a financially abusive ex-husband. I navigate the public transit system with a stroller. And I once talked a drug addict down from stabbing a cashier at my old retail job. I'm fat, I'm broke, and I'm highly motivated. Your boss's bad temper does not scare me. The eviction notice on my door does." Lachlan's eyebrows shot up. A tiny, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time in weeks. "All right, Miss Russell, follow me. But don't say I didn't warn you." The master suite was a study in dark wood, rich leather, and absolute gloom. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the morning sun. The only light came from the glow of a massive television screen, tuned to a muted news channel, and the amber liquid sloshing in a crystal tumbler. Vincent Moretti sat in his wheelchair near the unlit fireplace. Even seated, he exuded an aura of dangerous power. His broad chest and thick, tattooed arms stretched the fabric of his black designer shirt. His face was a striking mask of sharp angles, dark stubble, and hollowed-out cheekbones. But it was his eyes that made Pamela pause. They were a dead, icy black, burning with a mix of fury and profound humiliation. "I thought I said no more nurses, Lachlan." Vincent's voice was a low, gravelly snarl that vibrated in the large room. He didn't even turn his head to look at them. "She's not a nurse, boss. She's an applicant for the assistant position," Lachlan said quietly from the doorway. He then took a step back, essentially abandoning Pamela in the lion's den. The heavy doors clicked shut behind her. Vincent finally wheeled himself around, the electric motor whining softly. His cold eyes swept over Pamela, taking in her cheap clothes and her heavy physique. He sneered, a cruel, dismissive sound escaping his lips. "Are you lost, sweetheart? The kitchen is downstairs," Vincent mocked, lifting his whiskey glass. "Tell Lachlan to stop sending me the hired help." Pamela felt a hot flush of familiar shame at the fat joke, but she forcefully pushed it down. She walked further into the room, her sensible shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. She stopped a few feet away from his wheelchair, planting her feet shoulder-width apart. "I'm Pamela Russell. I'm your new assistant. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't drink alcohol before noon while taking nerve pain medication. It's bad for your liver," she said, her voice completely flat and professional. Vincent froze, his glass halfway to his lips. For a second, absolute silence reigned in the room. Then his face darkened into a terrifying scowl. With a sudden, violent sweep of his arm, he hurled the heavy crystal tumbler directly at the wall beside Pamela's head. The glass shattered into 100 jagged pieces, raining down on the floor. Whiskey splashed against the expensive wallpaper. Pamela didn't flinch. She didn't scream, and she certainly didn't run like the 14 women before her. She slowly turned her head to look at the broken glass, then turned her gaze back to the feared Mafia Don. "Are you finished?" Pamela asked, her tone eerily reminiscent of a mother dealing with a toddler's tantrum. Vincent stared at her, genuinely shocked. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I could have you buried under a highway before lunch." "Maybe," Pamela replied calmly, walking over to a nearby supply closet she had spotted upon entering. She pulled out a small broom and dustpan. "But right now you can't even pick up the glass you just threw. So unless you want a flat tire on that expensive chair of yours, I suggest you sit quietly while I sweep." Vincent's jaw locked. The sheer audacity of this overweight, poorly dressed civilian speaking to him this way was unfathomable. He reached toward his waistband, his hand resting menacingly on the cold steel of a concealed 9mm pistol. "Get out." Pamela knelt on the floor, her thick thighs pressing against the hardwood, and began sweeping the shards. "No. The job pays $15,000 a month. For that kind of money, you can throw a glass at the wall every single day, Mr. Moretti. I'll sweep it up every single time. But I am not leaving." She dumped the glass into a wastebasket, stood up, and dusted off her skirt. "Now, the file Mr. Bianchi gave me says you need to be transferred to your bed for physical therapy stretches. Since you fired the physical therapist, I'll be doing it." "Don't touch me," Vincent growled as she approached. "I don't want to touch you any more than you want to be touched. But we both have a job to do," Pamela said matter-of-factly. She stepped right into his personal space. Vincent tried to shove her back. His upper body was incredibly strong, heavily muscled from years of violence and recent wheelchair use. He placed his large hands on her shoulders and pushed hard. But Pamela was heavy. She had a solid, grounded center of gravity. Where a petite nurse would have stumbled backward and cried, Pamela merely shifted her weight, her soft, sturdy frame absorbing his push. She didn't budge. Vincent looked up at her, a flicker of confusion breaking through his rage. "I weigh 210 pounds, Mr. Moretti," Pamela said softly, locking eyes with him. "You're not going to push me over, and you're not going to push me away. Now put your arms around my neck." For reasons Vincent couldn't fully comprehend, he slowly lifted his arms. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the shock of a woman who looked at him, not with pity, but with stubborn exasperation. He wrapped his thick arms around her broad, soft back. Pamela bent her knees, wrapped her arms securely around his torso, and hoisted him up. It was a heavy, awkward lift, but her sturdy legs and broad back handled the weight perfectly. For a brief, agonizing moment, Vincent was entirely dependent on her, his useless legs dangling. He squeezed his eyes shut, hating the vulnerability, hating his broken body. Pamela didn't sigh or complain about his weight. She smoothly pivoted and gently lowered him onto the edge of the mattress. She didn't hover, instantly stepping back to give him his dignity. "There," she said, slightly out of breath. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" Vincent sat on the edge of the bed, his hands gripping the mattress. He stared at this strange, fat, immovable woman. She was an absolute anomaly in his world of tailored suits, flawless supermodels, and lethal assassins. "You're hired, Russell," Vincent muttered, looking away. "But don't expect me to make this easy for you." "I never expect anything to be easy," Pamela replied, walking over to finally open the heavy velvet curtains, letting the harsh, cleansing sunlight flood the dark room. Pamela Russell survived her first week. Then she survived the second. By the third week, she had established a routine that both baffled and pacified the Moretti household. Lachlan watched in silent awe as Pamela marched into the master suite every morning, carrying a tray of black coffee and a plate of whatever she felt like eating. She didn't hide her appetite, unabashedly eating buttered toast and heavy pastries while organizing Vincent's notoriously complex, encrypted schedules. Vincent, for his part, was changing. The explosive tantrums had reduced significantly, mostly because Pamela simply refused to entertain them. When he yelled, she ignored him. When he threatened her, she rolled her eyes. He found himself inexplicably looking forward to the heavy, rhythmic sound of her footsteps coming down the hall. In a world full of liars and sycophants, Pamela's brutal honesty was the most grounding force he had ever experienced. But the reality of Vincent's world was never far away. The Chicago underworld was a volatile ecosystem, and the news that the invincible Don Moretti was crippled had emboldened his enemies, specifically the rival Russo family. It was a gloomy Thursday afternoon. Pamela had been forced to bring Oliver to the estate. The public school had closed due to a plumbing issue, and she couldn't afford a last-minute sitter. Lachlan had strictly forbidden it, but Vincent had overheard the argument in the hallway, and surprisingly, ordered them to let the kid in. Oliver was currently sitting cross-legged on the floor of Vincent's massive office, quietly drawing in a coloring book, completely oblivious to the fact that the man sitting behind the mahogany desk was responsible for half the organized crime in the Midwest. Vincent pretended to review his ledgers, but his dark eyes kept drifting down to the small, scruffy boy. Then his gaze shifted to Pamela, who was sitting on a plush leather sofa, reviewing inventory files. She was wearing a plum-colored blouse that hugged her generous curves, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She looked utterly out of place in his dark, violent world, yet completely at home. The quiet domesticity was shattered by a sharp rap at the office door. One of the kitchen staff, a young man named Marco, entered pushing a silver serving cart. "Lunch, boss, sirloin and roasted vegetables, and a grilled cheese for the boy." "Put it on the table," Vincent ordered, not looking up. Marco wheeled the cart over, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged the plates. Pamela, who had spent the last decade stretching pennies and hyper-analyzing every expiration date on food, noticed immediately. She also noticed the faint, chemical smell rising off the steam of Vincent's meat. It wasn't garlic or rosemary. It smelled strangely metallic, like crushed bitter almonds. As Vincent wheeled himself toward the table and picked up a fork, Pamela stood up. Her motherly instincts and hypervigilance flared. "Wait," Pamela said sharply. Vincent paused, fork hovering halfway to his mouth. "What is it?" Pamela walked over to the cart, ignoring Marco's sudden, sharp intake of breath. She leaned down, her nose hovering over the steak. "Did the chef change the seasoning? Because this smells like industrial cleaner." Marco panicked. In a split second, the young waiter reached into his apron, pulling out a slanced, compact handgun. He hadn't come just to poison the Don. He had come to ensure the job was done if the poison failed. Everything happened in slow motion. Vincent, separated from his desk and his own weapon, was utterly exposed in his wheelchair. Lachlan was outside down the hall. Marco aimed the gun directly at Vincent's chest. Pamela didn't think. She didn't scream. With a guttural yell, she threw her entire 210-pound body forward, tackling Marco just as his finger squeezed the trigger. The gun went off with a quiet thwip, the bullet burying itself harmlessly into the ceiling plaster. Pamela crashed into the hitman, her heavy frame slamming him brutally to the hardwood floor. The sheer force of her weight drove the breath from Marco's lungs in a violent whoosh. She pinned his gun arm down with her knee, pressing her forearm into his throat with a terrifying protective ferocity she usually reserved for keeping Oliver safe. "Lachlan!" Vincent roared, his voice echoing with absolute thunder. The office doors burst open. Lachlan and 2 armed guards flooded the room. Within seconds, Marco was disarmed, dragged off the floor, and slammed against the wall, a gun pressed to his temple. Pamela scrambled backward, breathing heavily. Her plum blouse was torn at the shoulder, and her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She immediately crawled over to Oliver, who was staring wide-eyed, and pulled him fiercely against her chest, burying his face in her shoulder. Vincent wheeled himself over to Pamela, his black eyes blazing not with anger, but with an intense, burning adrenaline. He looked at the assassin, then back down at the soft, heavy-set mother who had just risked her life to save his. "Take him to the basement," Vincent ordered Lachlan, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "Find out who paid him, and when he tells you, break his legs." Lachlan dragged the thrashing Marco out of the room, leaving the office in a heavy, ringing silence. Vincent stopped his wheelchair inches from where Pamela sat on the floor, clutching her child. He reached down, his large, scarred hand gently gripping her soft, dimpled arm. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact with her. "Are you hurt?" Vincent asked, his voice softer than anyone in the syndicate had ever heard it. Pamela looked up at him, her chest heaving. She shook her head, tears of adrenaline finally pricking the corners of her eyes. "No, I'm okay." Vincent's thumb brushed gently against the torn fabric of her sleeve. In that moment, looking at the fierce, beautiful woman who had just defied death for him, the cold, impenetrable wall around the Mafia Don's heart cracked wide open. He didn't just need a caretaker anymore. He needed her. Fear is a peculiar thing. For most of her life, Pamela Russell's anxieties had been entirely mundane. Overdraft fees, empty refrigerators, and the humiliating sting of rejection. But as she sat on the edge of a massive, silk-sheeted bed in the east wing of the Moretti estate, she realized her reality had violently shifted. Following the thwarted assassination attempt in the office, Vincent had issued a decree that shattered her carefully compartmentalized life. She and Oliver were no longer allowed to leave the compound. "You are targets now," Vincent had told her, his dark eyes entirely devoid of compromise. "The Russo family knows you stopped their hitman. They will use you to get to me. You stay here, under my roof, where my men can see you." Pamela had fought him, of course. She had argued about Oliver's schooling, about her independence, about the utter insanity of moving her child into a mafia fortress. But Vincent had countered every argument with terrifying efficiency. Within 24 hours, Lachlan Bianchi had executed the Don's orders perfectly. Oliver's education. A private top-tier tutor was hired to teach Oliver in the estate's sprawling library. Living quarters. Pamela's meager belongings were packed from her run-down studio and moved into a luxurious multi-room suite connected to the main hallway. Security. 2 massive, heavily armed guards were assigned to stand outside her door at all times. It was a gilded cage, but for the first time in her life, Pamela didn't have to worry about how she was going to feed her son. The dynamic between her and Vincent had irrevocably changed. The hostile, bitter invalid she had met 3 weeks ago was slowly disappearing, replaced by the calculating, brilliant syndicate leader he had always been. And he was watching her. It was late Tuesday evening, and the estate was eerily quiet. Pamela walked into the master suite, carrying a tray with a glass of water and Vincent's evening nerve medication. He was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, staring out at the rain-slicked grounds. He was shirtless, his broad, tattooed back illuminated by the dim, ambient lighting. The raw power in his upper body was a stark contrast to the motionless legs hidden beneath dark sweatpants. "You didn't eat your dinner," Pamela noted, setting the tray down on the nightstand. "I wasn't hungry," Vincent replied quietly, not turning around. Pamela sighed, walking over to him. She didn't tiptoe around his moods anymore. "You need protein to help the damaged tissue in your spine heal. Starving yourself won't make your legs work faster, Vincent." It was the first time she had used his first name. Vincent finally spun his chair around. His expression was guarded, but there was a flicker of something raw in his dark eyes. He looked at her, truly looked at her. Pamela was wearing comfortable cotton leggings and an oversized faded band t-shirt. She made no apologies for the softness of her stomach or the thickness of her thighs. She stood there, completely unbothered by his intense scrutiny, radiating a warmth and stability he craved like a starving man. "Do you pity me, Pamela?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. It was the question that haunted his every waking moment. "Pity you?" Pamela crossed her soft arms over her chest, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "You live in a 50-room mansion, you have a private chef, and you run a multi-million-dollar empire. Why on earth would I pity you?" "Because I'm half a man," he spat bitterly, gesturing violently to his legs. "Because a month ago I could walk into a room and command it. Now I have to be hoisted into bed by my assistant." Pamela's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. "You commanded the room when you stared down an assassin in your office without flinching. You commanded the room when you made sure my son had a safe place to sleep. Legs don't make a man, Vincent. Character does. And frankly, the man sitting in front of me is far more intimidating than most men standing on 2 feet." Vincent stared at her, the bitter words dying in his throat. In his world, women were either trophies to be paraded or liabilities to be managed. They were thin, flawless, and utterly terrified of him. But Pamela was a force of nature. She was solid, grounded, and fiercely protective. He reached out, his large, calloused hand wrapping gently around her wrist. He pulled her a step closer. The heat radiating from his skin was palpable. "You are dangerous, Russell," he murmured, his thumb brushing against her pulse point. "You make me forget the rules." "Maybe your rules were stupid to begin with," she whispered back, her heart suddenly pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Before the moment could escalate, a sharp knock shattered the intimacy. Lachlan pushed the heavy oak doors open, his face grim, a manila folder clutched in his hand. He took one look at Vincent holding Pamela's wrist and quickly averted his eyes, clearing his throat. "Boss, we have a problem." Vincent released Pamela, instantly transforming back into the cold, calculating dawn. "What is it, Enzo?" Lachlan stepped into the room, holding out the folder. Marco finally broke. He gave up his handler. It was Domenico Russo. But that's not the worst part. The Russo family didn't just guess the security codes for the kitchen delivery entrance, Lachlan stated grimly. They had them hand-delivered, We have a mole, Vincent. Someone high up in the organization is feeding Domenico our schedules." Vincent's jaw locked, a lethal fury reigniting in his eyes. He looked at Pamela, who was standing frozen by the window, and then back to Lachlan. "Lock down the compound. No one gets in, no one gets out. And prepare the cars for tomorrow night. It's time I remind Chicago who runs this city." The syndicate did not operate in the shadows. They operated in plain sight, veiled behind legitimate businesses and high society charity galas. For the past month, Vincent's absence from these events had fueled the rumors of his demise. If he wanted to flush out the mole and prove the Moretti family was still untouchable, he had to show his face. The annual Heart of Chicago fundraising gala was neutral ground, hosted at the prestigious Grand Continental Hotel. Every major political figure, CEO, and underworld boss would be there. "I want you with me," Vincent had told Pamela that afternoon. "I'm an assistant, not a mob wife," she had protested, anxiety churning in her stomach. "I don't belong at a black-tie gala. Look at me, Vincent. I don't fit into those designer sample sizes your ex-girlfriends wore." Vincent had simply stared at her, picking up his phone and dialing a number. 2 hours later, a team of high-end tailors had arrived at the estate with a rack of custom gowns. Now, standing in front of the floor-to-length mirror in her suite, Pamela barely recognized herself. She wore a deep emerald green gown that draped flawlessly over her curves. It had a sweetheart neckline that accentuated her full bust and a structured bodice that cinched her waist before flowing over her wide hips. Her hair was swept up into an elegant twist, and soft makeup highlighted her bright eyes and dimpled cheeks. She looked regal, powerful, and undeniably beautiful. When she walked down the grand staircase, Vincent was waiting at the bottom. He was dressed in a bespoke black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his wheelchair polished to a gleaming dark metallic. When he saw her, he stopped breathing. For a long moment, the ruthless Mafia Don simply stared, entirely captivated by the woman descending toward him. "You look," Vincent started, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite mask. "Breathtaking." "And terrified," Pamela admitted, gripping the banister. "If I trip and fall in these heels, I'll take out half the foyer." A rare, genuine laugh rumbled in Vincent's chest. "If you fall, Pamela, I'll shoot anyone who looks at you. You have my word." The ride to the gala was tense. 2 armored SUVs flanked Vincent's customized vehicle. Lachlan sat in the front passenger seat, constantly scanning the perimeter. Pamela sat beside Vincent in the back, her soft, plump hand resting nervously on her lap. Halfway there, Vincent reached over and covered her hand with his thumb tracing soothing circles against her skin. He didn't say a word, but the protective gesture grounded her. The grand ballroom of the Continental Hotel was a sea of glittering diamonds, champagne flutes, and lethal secrets. When Vincent's security detail wheeled him through the double doors, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "He's paralyzed. Look at the chair. He's weak." Vincent kept his chin high, his expression a mask of pure, terrifying authority. Pamela walked rigidly beside him, her head held high, refusing to let the wealthy, judgmental crowd see her sweat. They settled at a VIP table near the back. Captains from various factions approached to pay their respects, their eyes darting nervously from Vincent's dead legs to the fierce, curvaceous woman standing guard by his side. Pamela acted as his proxy, flawlessly remembering names, alliances and multitudes, and subtle grievances she had read in the estate files. She was brilliant, and Vincent watched her, with a swelling sense of pride. But the night was far from over. While Vincent was locked in a tense, hushed conversation with a state senator, Pamela excused herself to use the restroom. The heavy gold-plated doors of the women's lounge swung shut behind her, muting the orchestra music. She walked over to the marble sinks, splashing a tiny bit of cold water on her wrists to cool down. Well, the famous human shield. Pamela froze. She looked up into the mirror. Standing behind her was a tall, excessively groomed man in a silver suit. He had slicked-back hair and a cruel, predatory smile. She recognized him instantly from the dossiers. Domenico Russo, the man who had sent Marco to kill Vincent. Pamela turned around slowly, refusing to shrink back. "Mr. Russo, you're in the women's restroom." "And you are out of your depth, Miss Russell." Domenico purred, taking a step closer. His eyes raked over her heavy body with blatant disgust. "I have to admit, when I heard Moretti survived, I was furious. When I heard a fat, glorified maid saved him, I was humiliated. You cost me a lot of money." "I suggest you back away," Pamela said, her voice remarkably steady. She planted her feet, utilizing her solid center of gravity, just as she had when she tackled the hitman. Domenico laughed, a dry, ugly sound. "Or what? You'll sit on me?" "Moretti is a cripple. He's a dead man, sitting in a chair. The moment his captains realize he can't protect them, they'll turn on him. And when they do, I'll make sure you and that little bastard son of yours are the first to." He didn't get to finish his sentence. The heavy bathroom doors burst open with a deafening crash. Vincent Moretti sat in the doorway, his electric wheelchair humming with menace. Behind him stood Lachlan, gun drawn and aimed at the ceiling. But it was Vincent who commanded the room. His face was a mask of unadulterated, psychopathic rage. In his right hand, rested casually on the armrest, was a heavy, suppressed .45 caliber handgun, pointed directly at Domenico Russo's chest. "Finish that sentence, Domenico," Vincent whispered, his voice echoing off the marble tiles like a death knell. "I dare you." Domenico paled, raising his hands slowly. "Vincent, this is neutral ground, a charity gala. You shoot me here, the commission will have your head." "I don't give a damn about the commission," Vincent snarled. He manually pushed his wheelchair forward, rolling right up to Domenico until the barrel of the gun was an inch from the rival boss's tailored suit. "You speak to her again, you look at her again, you even breathe in the direction of her son, and I will burn your entire family to ash. Do you understand me?" Domenico swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "Crystal clear, Moretti." "Get out." Domenico didn't hesitate. He scrambled past the wheelchair and bolted out the door. The silence rushed back into the room. Vincent slowly lowered his weapon, his chest heaving with exertion and adrenaline. He looked up at Pamela. She was trembling slightly, but her eyes were shining with a profound, undeniable, fierce admiration. "I told you," Vincent said softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "I'll shoot anyone who looks at you wrong." Pamela didn't care about the rules anymore. She didn't care about the mob, or the danger, or the fact that she was a single mum from the wrong side of the tracks. She walked across the marble floor, knelt beside his wheelchair, her emerald dress pooling around her knees, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Vincent dropped the gun onto his lap and pulled her in, burying his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in her sweet, vanilla scent. It was a fiercely protective embrace, a silent vow forged in the fires of the underworld. "Let's go home," Pamela whispered against his skin. But as Lachlan watched them from the doorway, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, reading the encrypted text message, and his blood ran cold. The mole wasn't a mid-level soldier. The text confirmed the betrayal came from inside the estate walls. The danger wasn't just at the gala. It was waiting for them back home. Rain slashed furiously against the tinted windows of the armored SUV as it sped away from the Continental Hotel. The adrenaline from the gala confrontation was still humming in Pamela's veins, but the atmosphere inside the vehicle had suddenly turned colder than the Chicago storm outside. Lachlan Bianchi sat in the front passenger seat, staring at the glowing screen of his encrypted phone. The harsh blue light illuminated the stark horror dawning on his face. He slowly turned his head to look back at Vincent, his voice barely more than a strained whisper. "Boss." The decryption finished. "The mole feeding the Russo family our security rotations and floor plans? It's Gregory Hughes." Pamela felt the blood drain entirely from her face, leaving her icy and lightheaded. Gregory Hughes was the head of estate security. He was the man who controlled the cameras, the gates, and the guard patrols. More importantly, he was the man currently inside the mansion. "Oliver," Pamela choked out, her voice cracking with absolute terror. "He's in the East Wing with the night nanny. Gregory has full access to that floor." Vincent's reaction was instantaneous. There was no panic, only a terrifying, cold-blooded hyper-focus. He reached under his custom leather seat, entering a rapid passcode on a biometric lockbox hidden in the floorboards. It popped open with a quiet hiss, revealing a matte black submachine gun and several spare magazines. He racked the slide with a sharp, mechanical clack that sounded deafening in the confined space of the SUV. "Tell the driver to floor it," Vincent ordered Lachlan, his dark eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Do not radio ahead. Do not alert the gate. We breach quietly. If Gregory has touched a single hair on that boy's head, I want him taken alive. I will peel the skin from his bones myself." He turned to Pamela, gripping her trembling hand with his large, steady one. "Breathe, Pamela. Look at me. We are going to get your son. I swear my life on it." The heavy gates of the Moretti estate were eerily wide open when the SUV roared up the private driveway. There were no guards stationed at the perimeter checkpoints. The sprawling mansion was plunged into darkness, the exterior floodlights deliberately disabled. It was a silent, looming fortress that had been turned into a trap. Lachlan killed the headlights as the driver slammed on the brakes near the side entrance. Before the vehicle even fully stopped, Lachlan was out the door, his weapon drawn, sweeping the immediate area. Vincent lowered the customized ramp of the SUV, smoothly rolling his wheelchair down onto the wet pavement. He moved with a practiced, lethal grace, the heavy weapon resting expertly on his lap. "Stay behind me," Vincent whispered to Pamela, gesturing for her to follow closely. Pamela kicked off her designer high heels, leaving them abandoned on the wet asphalt. She didn't care about the cold rain soaking through the hem of her expensive emerald gown, and she certainly didn't care about the danger. The fierce maternal instinct burning in her chest overshadowed any rational fear. Her heavy, bare feet slapped silently against the stone pathway as they entered the mansion through the darkened kitchen. The air inside was thick with tension. They found the first body in the hallway, one of the loyal night guards unconscious and zip-tied to a radiator. Thump! The muffled sound came from the grand foyer. Vincent signaled Lachlan to flank the left corridor, while he and Pamela moved straight ahead. As they approached the heavy archway leading to the foyer, the dim glow of emergency backup lights revealed a scene that made Pamela's heart stop entirely. Gregory Hughes, a massive man in tactical gear, was standing near the main double doors. One of his thick arms was wrapped tightly around the chest of 6-year-old Oliver, holding the terrified, crying child off the floor. In his other hand, Gregory held a suppressed pistol aimed squarely at the head of the trembling night nanny kneeling on the marble tiles. "Stop crying, kid, or I'll give you a real reason to whine," Gregory hissed, checking his watch. He was waiting for Domenico Russo's extraction team. Pamela didn't wait for Vincent's signal. The sight of her son in the hands of a traitor shattered the last of her restraint. She stepped out from the shadows of the archway, her broad shoulders squared, her eyes blazing with a feral, terrifying wrath. "Put my son down, Gregory," Pamela commanded. Her voice wasn't shaking. It was a booming, authoritative roar that echoed off the high ceilings of the foyer. Gregory jumped, spinning around to face her. Dragging Oliver with him, he aimed his weapon at Pamela, a sneer twisting his rugged face. Well, well, the fat little secretary made it back early. "Don't take another step, Russell. Domenico paid me $3 million to deliver the Don's weak spots. You and the brat are going to be my ticket to retirement." "You aren't going to retire." Vincent's deep, gravelly voice resonated from the darkness as he rolled his wheelchair into the dim light. The barrel of his submachine gun was trained dead on Gregory's chest. "You're going to die on this floor." Gregory laughed nervously, tightening his grip on the crying child. "You can't shoot me, boss. You're a cripple in a chair and you're too far away. You pull that trigger, the recoil throws your aim, and I put a bullet in the kid's head before I drop. You don't have the legs to brace yourself." "He doesn't need legs," Pamela said coldly. In a split second of perfectly unspoken coordination, Pamela lunged forward. She wasn't aiming to tackle Gregory. She was aiming to be the ultimate distraction. She threw her heavy frame aggressively toward a massive antique marble bust resting on a pedestal near Gregory's right side. With a brutal shove from her thick arms, Pamela sent the 200-pound marble statue crashing violently to the floor. The deafening, explosive sound of shattering stone startled Gregory, causing him to instinctively flinch and look away for a fraction of a second. His gun arm wavered. It was all the time Vincent needed. Vincent didn't miss. He had spent the last decade perfecting the art of violence, bracing his elbows against the armrests of his chair, utilizing his immense upper body strength to absorb the recoil. Vincent fired 2 suppressed rounds in rapid succession. Pfft, pfft. The first bullet shattered Gregory's kneecap. The second tore through his right shoulder, instantly paralyzing his gun arm. Gregory screamed in agony, collapsing to the floor and dropping his weapon. Oliver fell, but before the boy could even hit the marble tiles, Pamela was there. She slid across the floor, catching her son and pulling him fiercely against her soft, protective chest, burying his face in her shoulder so he wouldn't see the carnage. Lachlan rushed into the room from the flank, immediately kicking Gregory's discarded gun away and pinning the screaming traitor to the ground with a heavy boot to the throat. Vincent wheeled himself forward, the motor of his chair humming in the deadly quiet that followed. He stopped right beside the bleeding, whimpering head of security. Vincent looked down, his dark eyes completely devoid of mercy. "Lachlan," Vincent said softly. "Take him to the soundproof room in the basement. Keep him alive until the morning. I have a few questions about Russo's bank accounts." As Lachlan dragged the traitor away, Vincent turned his chair toward Pamela. She was sitting on the cold marble, rocking Oliver back and forth, whispering soothing words into his hair. Her beautiful emerald dress was stained with water and dirt. Her hair was falling out of its elegant twist, and she was crying silent tears of sheer relief. Vincent locked the brakes on his chair and reached down. He placed a gentle, grounding hand on Pamela's broad shoulder, then moved it to cup the back of Oliver's head. "You're safe now," Vincent murmured, his voice thick with a profound, unconditional vow. "No one will ever touch either of you again. I promise." In the ruthless world of the Chicago Syndicate, retaliation was expected to be loud, bloody, and public. But Vincent Moretti was a changed man. He no longer felt the need to prove his physical dominance with street-level violence. He had a sharper mind than any man in the city, and now he had something real to protect. 2 weeks after the incident at the estate, Domenico Russo was destroyed, not with bullets, but with brilliant, devastating strategy. Using the intel extracted from Gregory Hughes, Vincent systematically dismantled the Russo family's financial infrastructure. He anonymously leaked their offshore accounts to federal prosecutors, orchestrated hostile corporate takeovers of their legitimate front businesses, and bought out their corrupt police captains. Within 14 days, Domenico Russo wasn't dead, but he was bankrupt, isolated, and fleeing the country like a coward. Vincent had proven that a man in a wheelchair could be the most dangerous predator in the jungle. The Moretti estate had transformed. The suffocating gloom was gone, replaced by the warm, chaotic energy of a real home. The heavy velvet curtains remained open, allowing the summer sun to pour over the dark hardwood floors. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Pamela stood in the massive, state-of-the-art kitchen, wearing a comfortable pair of denim shorts and a loose white blouse. She was humming softly as she stirred a large pot of homemade marinara sauce, the rich scent of garlic and basil filling the air. She felt him before she heard him. The soft hum of the electric wheelchair paused just behind her. Vincent reached out, wrapping his strong arms around her wide waist from behind. He rested his chin against her back, pressing a soft kiss to her shoulder blade. "Lachlan just called," Vincent murmured, his voice a low, comforting rumble against her skin. The federal indictments against Domenico's top lieutenants just hit the news. The Russo family is officially eradicated. The city is ours. Pamela smiled, leaning back against his sturdy chest. She didn't flinch at the mention of his syndicate business anymore. They had forged a partnership built on absolute honesty. She managed his life, and he protected hers. "Good," Pamela said simply, turning around in his embrace to face him. She looked down at him, her eyes tracing the sharp, handsome lines of his face. He looked healthier than he had in months. The bitter, hollowed-out look in his eyes had been completely replaced by a steady, unwavering warmth. Vincent reached up, gently tracing the soft curve of her jawline, his thumb brushing over her dimple. "I owe you everything, Pamela. You didn't just save my life. You brought me back to life. You marched into my dark, miserable world and refused to let me wallow in my own pity." Pamela's breath caught in her throat. Even now, wrapped in his arms, the insecurities of her past sometimes whispered in her ear. "Vincent, look at me. I'm not a supermodel. I'm not a polished mob wife. I'm just me. A heavy, stubborn mother from the South Side." Vincent's gaze darkened with fierce intensity. He pulled her closer by the hips, ignoring the chair between them. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known. Your strength, your heart, the way you threw yourself in front of a bullet for me, the way you protect Oliver. There isn't a woman on this earth who could compare to you." He cupped her face with both hands, his calloused thumbs wiping away a stray tear that had escaped her eye. "I love you, Pamela. Not as my assistant, not as my caretaker. I love you as my equal, my queen, if you'll have a broken man like me." "You aren't broken," Pamela whispered fiercely, leaning down to press her forehead against his. "You never were." When their lips met, it wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was deep, passionate, and entirely consuming. It was the collision of two survivors who had finally found their safe harbor. Pamela wrapped her arms around his thick neck, completely surrendering to the overwhelming love and security she had searched for her entire life. Suddenly, the kitchen doors swung open, and the sound of rapid, tiny footsteps echoed against the tiles. "Mom! Vincent!" Oliver yelled, running into the kitchen holding a brightly colored drawing. He stopped short, giggling as he saw them. Vincent pulled back from the kiss, a wide, genuine smile breaking across his face. He held his arm out to the boy. "Come here, Ollie. Show me what you got." Oliver ran over, completely unfazed by the wheelchair, and climbed effortlessly onto Vincent's lap. Pamela watched as the feared Mafia Don, a man who commanded legions of armed soldiers, carefully examined a crayon drawing of a superhero family. Pamela realized then that her days of counting pennies and running from eviction notices were over forever. She hadn't just survived the terrifying world of the Chicago syndicate. She had conquered it simply by refusing to apologize for who she was. She was Pamela Russell, a devoted mother, a formidable woman, and the undisputed heart of the Moretti Empire. Together, they were untouchable. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through love, loyalty, and surviving the dangerous Chicago underworld. If you were inspired by Pamela's fierce, unapologetic strength and Vincent's powerful redemption, please like this video, share it with your friends who love a gritty, heartwarming romance, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let us know in the comments below what your favorite twist was.